Hello all, welcome to Paritranaya. In this class, we shall discuss about an important economic related topic, that is monetary policy. So often when we are reading concepts related to economics or while reading newspaper, we come across two important aspects. One is monetary policy and the another one is fiscal policy. So first we need to understand the difference. So when it comes to fiscal policy, it is implemented by government, whereas when it comes to monetary policy, it is a responsibility of RBI. So this fundamental difference is very much important. So we have already discussed about what is fiscal policy and all in a separate class. So you can revisit that class to understand about the fiscal policy. So in today's class, we will be discussing about monetary policy. So what do we understand by monetary policy? So monetary policy is to have control over the flow of money. So who wants to establish this control over the flow of money? RBI wants to establish the control over the flow of money. So why RBI wants to establish this control? Because RBI has been given that responsibility. RBI has been given that responsibility. Next, as a out of curiosity, why do RBI want to control the money flow? Money flow. So this is the next question. So here we need to understand certain concepts. So one is inflation, another one is economic growth. So we know that what is inflation? Whenever the price of a particular commodity increases, we call it as inflation. For example, if a pen costs 10 rupees and if its price increases to 12 rupees, then we indicate that inflation has occurred with respect to pen prices. So the inflation is almost by 20%. 20%. So whether this inflation should be completely zero? No, it should not be completely zero. Some level of inflation should be there. But what is that ideal level? About that we will be discussing later on. But our concern is if inflation becomes too much high, then that should not happen. So that has to be controlled. That has to be controlled. So now we need to understand the relationship between money flow and inflation. So whenever there is more money flow, then it will lead to more inflation. It will lead to more inflation, and we want to control that inflation by regulating the money flow. By regulating the money flow. This is one aspect. Another one is economic growth. So whenever we want the economic growth to happen, then we require more money supply. So when there is more money supply, more economic growth. And whether we are interested to promote economic growth or reduce it. So always we are interested to promote economic growth. But here comes the conundrum, the problem. So if you increase money supply, it will lead to economic growth, but also at the same time it will lead to increase in inflation. So if you decrease money supply, it will have a negative impact on economic growth, whereas it can bring inflation under control. So RBI is in a dilemma to always make a balance between inflation control and economic growth. But if at all there is if at all they have to prioritize among the inflation control and economic promotion of economic growth, then they will give first priority to inflation control. Inflation control. So that is why in order to control this money, in order to control this money flow, so RBI will bring policies, or it will bring a policy called as monetary policy. And under this monetary policy, it will be using multiple instruments. So about those instruments we will be discussing later on. So here, let us look at this example wherein we will find the relationship between money supply and inflation. So money supply, whenever it increases, it will lead to increase in inflation. Why increase in inflation? Because if I have more money with me, then what happens? So I'll start purchasing more number of items. So similarly, if all the people have sufficient amount of money with them, if all of them, if they start purchasing the goods, then what happens? The demand of that particular good will increase. So when the demand increases, the price of that good increases. So that is why when there is a sufficient money supply, or when there is increase in the money supply, it will lead to increase in inflation. Okay. So in 1 month, if I get just what 100 rupees as an income, but in the next month, if I get 200 rupees, then what happens? So I'll be tempted to buy more things. Okay, buy more things. So it will lead to what? Inflation. Similarly, when there is a decrease in money supply, there will be a decrease in inflation. The prices of the commodities will come down. Okay, come down. Now another thing which we need to remember here is, whenever I say money supply, so there is a link between money supply and bank. So this link you have to establish. What is that? So money supply can increase only when the bank starts extending more and more loan, when the bank starts giving more and more loan. But the next question is, if the bank is ready to give more and more loan, also at the same time there should be borrowers who are ready to borrow it. So borrowers will be ready to take a loan only if the interest rate in the bank is less. So if the interest rate is more, then the borrowers will not be interested to take loan. So here we shall connect these things. One is bank, interest rate, money supply and inflation. So if the banks decrease the interest rate, if there is decreased interest rate, what happens? So more and more people are willing to take loan. Now when I say more and more people are willing to take loan, so it may be an individual or an industry. So here we shall consider the example of individual itself. So money supply increases because bank is providing loan at a lesser rate of interest. So money supply will increase. So because of this increased money supply, so what happens? More and more people will start purchasing the goods, and the demand of the good will increase, and it will lead to increase in inflation. Increase in inflation. On the other hand, if the bank increases interest rate, so because of the high interest rate, people will not be willing to borrow money, or they will not be interested to take loan. So in that case, what happens? So the money supply in the overall economy will be less, and because of the decrease in money supply, there will be less demand for the goods, and because of the less demand, so the prices will come down, so inflation will decrease. Inflation will decrease. So here we understood the relationship between interest rate and inflation. When the interest rate increases, inflation comes down. When the interest rate decreases, inflation will go up, and when the interest rate increase, inflation will come down. Okay, will come down. Now when I say inflation may be with respect to food items like wheat, jawar, etc. Similarly, it may be with respect to fuel like petrol and diesel, or it may be with inflation with respect to prices of transport. For example, you may be using public transport like bus or train. So if there is it is with respect to what? Charges of those fare of those travel charges. Okay, fare of those travel charges. Now, so this is the relationship between inflation and interest rate. Similarly, we shall understand the relationship between economic growth and interest rate. So now, what do we understand by economic growth? So more GDP indicates economic growth. So more jobs. If more number of jobs are being created, employment opportunities are being created, it means it's a good sign of economic growth. So if you produce more goods, then it's a good sign of economic growth. If more agricultural produce like jawar, wheat, sugar, etc., there is also a good sign of economic growth. Okay, so more good transport facilities like road and all, so that is also a good sign of economic growth. But for all these things to happen, there should be sufficient money. Example, if more jobs have to be created, then some industrialist have to take a loan, and he has to start a new factory. So when he starts new factory, so automatically he has to what? Hire more number of people. Similarly, if agricultural produce has to increase, then we require many agricultural inputs, like it may be seeds, or it may be fertilizers, or it may be pesticides, or he may even want to purchase some capital instruments like tractors and all. For everything requires money. Now when money is available at a cheaper rate, when money is available at less interest rate, what happens? More and more number of people will be interested to what? Borrow. For example, an industrialist will be interested to borrow more money. Similarly, an individual will be interested to borrow more money. So in that case, what happens? It will lead to more money flow. So less interest rate, more money flow. But when more money flow occurs, so there will be an increased economic growth. Increased economic growth. So more jobs will be created, more agricultural produce, etc. But similarly, if the rate of interest is more, so lesser number of people will be interested to take loan because of the high interest rate. So lesser number of people will invest in new factories or will invest in the agricultural inputs. So now automatically economic growth will come down. So more interest rate, decreased money flow. So decreased money flow will lead to decrease in economic growth. So here what we saw, two contrasting things. So with increased rate of interest, economic growth will come down, but inflation will be controlled. With a decreased rate of interest, economic growth will be promoted, but at the same time inflation will increase. So that's why our RBI always it will be in a confusion. So always it wants to balance between growth and inflation, and in case of conflict always it wants to give a higher priority to inflation. It wants to control inflation. Now in the future we'll be in the forthcoming classes we'll be discussing about another important concept called as money market. But here we shall understand that SBI, I have taken an example of SBI and ICICI. So whatever the discussions we are making, they apply to both government banks like SBI as well as private banks like ICICI. So here borrowers may be an individual or an industrialist or a businessman. Now how much interest SBI charges to a borrower or how much interest ICICI bank charges to a borrower, it all depends upon what? Some other factors. So I have taken one such factor, that is repo rate. Okay, so at what rate of interest RBI will lend the loan to borrowers, it is dependent on repo rate. Okay, it is dependent on repo rate. Now what is this repo rate? Now this repo rate, it is one part of monetary policy. Okay, as we have said, so monetary policy, so one of the component or one of the instrument of monetary policy is repo rate. So as an example, I have taken only one instrument. There are similarly many other policy instruments of whom we will be discussing later on. So now using this, who will set this repo rate? This repo rate changes can be made by RBI. So with the help of repo rate, RBI will decide at what rate of interest SBI should give loan and at what rate of interest ICICI should give loan. So everything is dependent on repo rate, and this repo rate is controlled by RBI. So from this, at the broader perspective, we understand that RBI is controlling the money flow in the market. With the help of some instruments whom we call them as monetary instruments, and among those monetary instruments, one important instrument is repo rate. Okay, So through this money market, RBI will control the money flow. Using the monetary instruments, and one instrument is repo rate. So in the next discussions, we will be seeing how exactly what instruments RBI will be using and how those instruments can help in maintaining the goal of bringing the prices under control, and also at the same time ensuring economic growth. So in this context, before we move to the next part, let us discuss few of these things. So what is monetary policy? Use of monetary instruments. So as an example, I took only one example now, that is repo rate. So using such instruments like repo rate under its control, under RBI's control, to achieve the goals specified in the RBI Act. So whatever the goals that have been specified in the RBI Act, so to achieve those goals, so RBI will use the monetary instruments. So what are these goals? So these goals are price stability, that is keeping inflation in control. Another goal is to promote economic growth. But when there is a conflict between whether I should give priority to price stability or objective of growth, so we need to remember that primary is price stability. So I will accord higher importance to bringing inflation under control. That's why price stability is necessary precondition to sustainable growth. Okay, important point. Next, we understood that inflation has to be brought under control. But how to measure inflation? There are different ways of measuring inflation which we have already discussed. For example, we have discussed about consumer price index based inflation. Another one is wholesale price index based inflation. So about those things we have discussed in a separate video. You can watch that video. So here we need to understand that RBI, while using these monetary instruments, so which inflation it will be targeting, whether it will be targeting CPI or WPI. So important point to note here is it will target CPI. It will target consumer price index based inflation. So it wants to keep CPI inflation under control. So when I say inflation, what is that control? So whether inflation should be 0 or what? No. So ideally, inflation should be in the range of 4 plus or minus 2%. It means 4 minus 2 is 2%. 4 plus 2 is 6%. So if the inflation is in the range of 2% to 6%, then that is acceptable. If the inflation becomes less than 2% or more than 6%, then it is not acceptable. Okay. So who has set this target of 4 plus or minus 2%? It is set by the government. So while setting, government has consulted with the RBI. So government, along with the consultation with the RBI, it has set this target. After setting this target, it has given the responsibility to RBI to implement and see that it is within the target. Okay, within the target. So what constitutes failure to achieve? When do we call that monetary policy has failed? So when this monetary policy has failed to achieve the target for 3 consecutive quarters. So what do we understand by that? So in any financial year, so first quarter will be April, May, June. Next, July, August, September, second quarter. Next, October, November, December, third quarter. Next, January to March is fourth quarter. Okay. So each quarter of 3 months period. So now for 3 consecutive quarters, so for approximately 9 months, if they are unable to maintain the inflation within this range, for close to 9 months, if the inflation is either below 2% or more than 6%, it means the monetary policy has failed. Okay, monetary policy has failed. Even this is also an important point to note. Okay. Next, who has given the RBI the responsibility of this monetary policy? So it is a legislative mandate. It means or Parliament has made a law and given this responsibility to RBI to maintain to implement the monetary policy. Okay, monetary policy. And while implementing the monetary policy, it uses an important rate called as repo rate. So about this repo rate and how it is used and how it impacts the money flow in the market, we will be discussing about these things later on. Okay, later on. So here we need to understand that with the help of a repo rate, so the actual rate will flow to the will be impact to the money flow with the help of money market. Okay, with the help of money market. So about the money market also we will be discussing later on. Okay. So money market to the entire financial system, money will start flowing. So here to make this monetary policy, we have a separate committee called as Monetary Policy Committee. Because RBI has many responsibilities, and among those multiple responsibilities, one responsibility is monetary policy. So they have made a separate committee for that. So, and the responsibility of this committee is to make the monetary policy and implement it. So here, this monetary policy committee, it consists of 6 members, including the chairman. So all these points are important from exam point of view. So 6 members, and RBI governor is by default the chairman of monetary policy committee. And among these 3 members, 3 are outsiders, and they hold office for a period of 4 years. Okay. So these points are very important. Next, instruments of monetary policy. So as I mentioned, so monetary policy, it consists of various instruments. So with the help of these instruments, what does the RBI try to achieve? The RBI tries to establish control over the money flow. Okay. So with the help of this establishment of control over the money flow, it wants to bring inflation under control and also at the same time promote economic growth. So to ensure that inflation is under control and to also ensure that economic growth is taking place, so it is ensuring that the money flow is under control with the help of these instruments. So these instruments are repo rate, reverse repo rate, liquidity adjustment facility, marginal standing facility, corridor, bank rate, cash reserve ratio, statutory liquidity ratio, open market operations, and market stabilization scheme. So all these instruments are very important. So in the forthcoming classes, we will be discussing how exactly this repo rate or any of the other instruments will have an impact on money flow and inflation. So for all our further updates, subscribe to our channel and hit on the bell icon. Thank you.